Welcome to Hello Help Desk, the podcast where we dive into the latest insight and tackle the challenges that keeps your workplace running smoothly. I'm Benti Brambedari, Head of Delivery at Silver Cloud, and today we're covering the topic that every business deals with, but not everybody talks about, payroll. And joining us today is our payroll expert, Eve Collins, who brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to help us break down what it takes to keep payroll running like clockwork, from compliance and accuracy to managing payroll issues effectively. So whether you're in HR, finance, or just curious, settle in as we explore the in and outs of payroll with Eve on Hello Help Desk.
Thanks, Venti. Hi, everyone. I'm one of the principal payroll consultants at Silver Cloud. As you may know, there are many benefits to payroll and Dayforce. So I'm really excited to be able to discuss today the topics just mentioned by Bunty. Just to note, if you do have any questions as we go, just pop them in the Q&A section and we'll pick these up throughout the session.
Thank you, Eve. So shall we begin by discussing key consideration when preparing to go live with UK payroll in Dayforce?
Sure. So one important activity is thinking about your current payroll processes. First is how these are going to work in Dayforce. To support this process, it does help if you have an understanding of how Dayforce works. There is some great training that we expect individuals to complete at different stages of the project. It is important to ensure that each member of the project team does complete that Dayforce training relevant for them. There's also the process mapping, which is something that Silver Cloud do offer support with, and that's going to help you translate your current processes into Dayforce processes. It's also useful for us during requirement gathering because we want to understand how you're doing things now so we can accurately capture and configure requirements in Dayforce.
Thank you, Eve. So have you got a payroll example for requirement gathering?
Yeah, so if we use maternity leave for the UK as an example, of course, we configure statutory payments and entitlements in Dayforce as standard, but you may have some occupational entitlements and pay which also need to be configured. So there's a number of different questions that we'll want to ask during requirement gathering, such as what payments are employees entitled to and for how long. The standard Dayforce rules for the UK does allow for, say, a set percentage of pay for a number of weeks. So it may be 100% pay for 12 weeks and 50% pay for 12 weeks as an example. We also want to know how it's calculated. So is it calculated on regular pay, such as salary, or does it need to be calculated on average weekly pay in line with statutory payments? Also, who qualifies for the additional payments? We need to understand things such as who will be submitting the leave of absence requests, who will be approving them before it's actually processed on Dayforce. So with this in mind, also having those clear process maps is going to support that. And it's also useful as well when it comes to the user acceptance stage.
And it's also important to highlight that part of the requirement gathering, we do provide an extensive document with example to guide our customers to better complete the workbook. So can you tell me more about the importance of UAT in preparation for go live?
Yes. So once your configuration is complete, we do conduct our own internal testing. But then it's also time for your own team to conduct their testing. The purpose of UAT is to ensure that the configuration meets your requirements and you know your requirements best. So it is really important that you're looking at the test cases we provide, but also that you're designing your own test cases to conduct as well.
Okay. And what sort of payroll item would you expect to be tested during UAT?
There's a lot of different payroll items to test, but
Yeah.
a few examples. So you have your statutory, of course, that is standard, but as I mentioned, you may also have top-ups to be configured. So certain tests may be things like, is the occupational maternity pay calculated based on the employee's length of service correctly, if that is a qualifier that you use. No, also we would expect all your different earnings and deductions to be tested as well. You may have many of these, so it can take some time to test them all, but it is important to make sure that they are accurate. After all, this is how the employees are actually going to get paid. So this would include fixed recurring payments such as car allowance and ad hoc payments as well, such as a bonus. You want to make sure is the tax calculation correct? Is the method correct for your deductions and earnings? We also need to make sure that you're testing numerous different employees with different scenarios. One thing I'd add as well on the expectations for UAT is just making sure that the relevant resources are involved. So for payroll, we'd expect the payroll team is going to know their processes best. So it's really important that they are involved in UAT, as well as it does provide a really good opportunity for the team to start developing an understanding of how payroll works before going live.
Absolutely, thank you. And you do mention an important point here is about running detailed testing, regardless if it's going to be testing whether an amount is flowing correctly on Dayforce. You have to do it just to have the confidence in what was built in Dayforce. So you can be, you can install the same confidence in your employees when going live. What are your top tips for UAT?
Okay, so first of all, and it may be a given, but just making sure that you thoroughly review your test cases against your requirements before you commence UAT. Just making sure that you've captured the scenarios you need to make sure that we have actually met your requirements. One thing I'd say as well is if you do need any guidance in designing your own test cases, or if you do have any questions, then you shouldn't hesitate to ask for support. If you are client with SilverCloud, so that we are here to support you throughout the project and we're happy to do so. Another recommendation would be when you are going through testing is to be 100% certain when you're passing those test cases. If not, it's best to fail it, even if it's something minor that you need to check. None of us like to see failed test cases, but it is best to be certain that it is meeting requirements exactly. Another tip would probably be just around who's involved in the test cases. So if you do have any testing that you have different teams involved, so maybe it overlaps between the HR and the payroll process, then try and test it together so you can make sure that the process is streamlined, everyone's happy to pass that test case. So an example may be a salary change. So for example, HR may submit that form. So if you're thinking about the role that actually submits it, who should be approving it, how does payroll get notified? If you're actually testing that end-to-end process with everyone that should be involved, it just makes sure that there isn't any gap or issue in that process.
Absolutely. And long gone are those days where we would use Excel to actually manage UAT. At SilverCloud, we leverage the best tool on the market for our case management. So as an example, when actually you're failing a case, it sends out a notification to the consultant. And also when the consultants are writing a commentary or making an update, they have the ability to tag a specific person, so notification goes to that person. So you don't need to wait for the next day where you're going to have your stand-up meeting. You can actually have all the information in real time as cases are passed or cases are being actioned. So you can have all these notifications. So thank you, Eve. That was really useful. So quite often we talk about parallel testing, and there's lots of assumption about it. So can you please explain our viewers what parallel testing is?
Yes, so the process that we follow for parallel involves running two previously committed pay periods from your legacy system in Dayforce, and then we compare the output from each system to make sure that the payroll in Dayforce is working as you'd expect it to. Also for clients with WFM, we would like to test the feed from WFM to payroll. So the output comparison process involves reconciling company totals and employee totals, as well as HMRC outputs such as the EPS summary. So there are a couple of benefits from doing previously committed periods instead of a side-by-side, which many people may think of parallel and think of side-by-side, but with a previously committed period, example of a benefit is that it gives you the ability to choose the periods that you're going to use for parallel. You want to use periods that involve many different scenarios, earnings, and deductions as possible, so you are thoroughly testing it. One thing that's probably worth mentioning as well is before we commence parallel, we do a data load. So that includes things such as HR information, tax information, year to dates, and that just makes sure that when you're commencing parallel, you're working with up-to-date and accurate data at that point in time, which also makes sure that output is accurate as well. I think it's also important to note that the purpose is not necessarily to make sure that the outputs match exactly. We will have what we call an acceptable difference, which we agree on beforehand. So it may be a penny, 50p, a pound per employee, or it could be different from that. But it could be possible that there are some other differences that are explainable, such as changes in process. We do see possible errors in legacy system. So just things to bear in mind, that there can be differences there, but the important thing is you're able to explain them and they are acceptable when you move forwards after parallel.
And you did mention about testing all the different scenarios. Can you give us an example? Because quite often we do not recommend client to actually be testing the first pay period of the tax year. But can you give us an example how to make the best decision on the pay period that we want actually to simulate payroll?
I think most individual and payroll will remember if there was a period that was significant, if they had a lot of different payment elements coming through or deductions, perhaps it was a period where there was a lot of pay increases that went through. So thinking back on your periods and thinking which pay period had the most going through, although it can be a lot of work for parallel, this means you are testing as many different earned deductions as possible. In terms of the periods to choose and the point in time, it is beneficial not to use one at the start of the tax year and use one mid-year, even if when you go live, you're planning to go live at the start of the year and it wouldn't involve year to dates. Having that practice of running the parallel with the year to dates in there, the tax calculations and seeing how it adjusts when you enter in different payments and deductions, it's important to test that as well. So on top of being a period where there's as many different scenarios, having one mid-year where you do have that year-to-date load is beneficial as well.
So what you're saying is that choose the most difficult and challenging pay period that the payroll team has encountered. Am I correct?
Yes, I think not everybody would like to do that because, as I said, it could be a lot of work. But that is, if you can and you have capacity for it, it is going to put you in the best position for going live. As I said, you're going to be testing as many different scenarios as you possibly can during parallel. So when you go live, you're going live with a system that you have thoroughly tested.
Okay. And also at the end of the testing, do you also recommend testing your GL report or any exports as well?
Yeah, so for both parallel periods, we would be looking at testing or exports. So that would be your GL. It will also be things like a pension export if you have them, because again, we want to make sure that the output matches and it's the format as well. So as I said, there may be acceptable differences, so there's reasons why, but things like the format, how the data is pulling through, you want to make sure that is accurate so that again, when you go live, you're not going to have issues with those exports as well.
Yeah, thank you. You have mentioned about data load. What should I consider in terms of data during a project?
So we do data loads at different points of project with Dayforce implementation. The earliest load we do is during the model stage. So as that is quite early on, it's important to start thinking as soon as possible about your data, where it's stored, how easy it is to extract, the format it's in, is it clean and complete? As well, there is likely going to be some transformation required to get the data into the Dayforce template. So we do provide the templates early on to support that planning. I mean, you may have, maybe as a client, have data stored in different systems. So you maybe going from multiple systems to one, the Dayforce. If that's the case, it can be harder to pinpoint exactly what data got stored where and how you're going to pull that together. So it does, having that plan and having a data strategy early on is going to minimize risks of delays and errors at critical stages of the project, which are later on.
So it's basically a practice before you actually preparing your go live templates.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any harm at all in looking at that early, just making a note of this is where we've got this data, this is how we're going to get it out. I mean, it could even be that if you that you may need to there's some fee for getting that data extraction, which can happen as well. So just as soon as you possibly can, starting to think about where your data is, how you're going to get it out is going to benefit you when you actually need to then begin to populate those templates.
Okay, thank you. Very useful. So, do you have any pointers in terms of preparing to go live with payroll on Dayforce?
So we've covered mapping, process mapping, Dayforce training, data planning, and communication between teams throughout the project, such as during UAT. One thing I'd add in terms of communication is it's also important during requirement gathering. So as I mentioned with UAT, if you do have any process interlinks between HR and payroll, then they should be reviewed together to make sure you're capturing everything. I'd also add to make sure you're making use of all the resource available to you. So if you're working with Silver Cloud, making use of the consultant's expertise, we're here to support and we want your project to be successful. So it's just making sure if you do have any questions or concerns, then to send them through so we can support you. There are also some, sorry, go.
Yeah, I just wanted, sorry to cut you, but I wanted to ask, so since you were also on the client side, what were you doing to be better prepared? And can you give us a few examples?
Yes, so when I was on the client side, I found that the user guides were really useful, that Dayforce provides, so as well as community support portal and the actual training. So what I would do, especially with the guides, is bookmark tabs in there that I refer to the most or useful to have. There's a lot of guidance in them on how to use and maintain the system. As if you've looked at it before, you'll know that the guide, especially payroll guide, is very extensive. There's a lot in there, but if you do get to know it and you know the particular pages you go to most, then as I said, you can tag them in there. It's also great to bookmark it on your browser for quick access. Even now, I have the guides pinpointed so I can refer to them if needed.
Thank you. I have the Dayforce implementation guide bookmark as well, which I find is very useful for quick references, especially when you want just to check something quickly, how it works, or just get a quick explanation. The payroll guide is great, so is the Dayforce implementation guide. But great, thank you. Let's now move on to something more interesting. Let's talk about how Dayforce supports more agile payroll processing and what are the benefits.
Course. So one of the benefits that we quite often see with clients when they do switch to Dayforce is the reduction in payroll errors. So you may be a client that has a lot of manual data input in your legacy system at the moment, or maybe not be legacy if you're still using it. But this could involve manual input of all payments and deductions. It could just be something such as pay change calculations that are manual. So if there's any retro changes in things such as salary, you may need to do the manual calculations outside of Dayforce and then outside your system and then input these into payroll. That can be a lot of work, especially during times such as pay review cycles. So there is a lot of automated processes in Dayforce to reduce this manual work. So for example, as discussed, a retro salary change is submitted for an employee or group of employees in Dayforce, then you can go into payroll and run something we call the sync pay changes. So you can select the individuals or group of employees that have had that change, and that then Dayforce will calculate the difference for you and it will pull it into the pay run as a quick entry. And another benefit of having it as a quick entry is, of course, you can review those amounts, you can audit it and make changes if needed or remove them if you've accidentally pulled the wrong employee through. The sync pay changes functionality is really good because it's not just for salary changes. It can be used for hourly rate changes, new starts in previous periods, payroll elections if they're flagged as that as well.
Also, quite often we hear a lot of clients complaining about payroll processing is a lot of manual work. Are there any automation to reduce the amount of manual entries during payroll processing?
Yes, so I have worked with clients previously who, for example, had to input huge stacks of paper timesheets into payroll, which, as you can imagine, is a lot of work. So in Dayforce, you have that integration between WFM and payroll, which reduces the need for such a time-consuming task. And of course, those time same things are going to translate into cost savings as well, because those individuals are then able to dedicate that time they were spending doing that to other tasks. And as well, with any manual entry, there's going to be possible human error. So the automations help prevent those incorrect payments to employees as well. Outside of that, there are also several background jobs, particularly for payroll to automate processes. An example would be the post-termination job, which automatically adds P45 to the open pay run. So you can choose to have this running as often as needed. We usually have it set up so it's running every night. So you do have the option still, of course, to manually add these, but having a job schedule can save time, especially if you have larger pay groups and a higher volume of terminations.
If you don't mind, we do have a question from the members of the audience. So the question reads, how else does Dayforce enable more agile payroll processing?
So in terms of compliance, we all know payroll compliance is critical, and there are regular changes and regulations and tax laws, and it can be difficult for payroll to keep on top of that, on top of everything else they have to do on a daily basis. So whether it is perhaps having to update the pay codes that are used for student loan calculations, or the rate of statutory sick pay held in the system and the statutory parental payments, in Dayforce that's built in for you and it's updated when applicable. So payroll no longer have to worry about having to keep on top of that and make those amendments themselves. They can just focus on all the rest that payroll has to do. So using Dayforce, you are mitigating the risks associated with non-compliance with minimal effort.
Thank you so much. So let's now talk about payroll troubleshooting. Are there any errors you see more frequently, and how do you resolve them?
There is. What I'll do, I'll share my screen now, so everyone can see the different areas of the profile that I navigate to, whilst we discuss the errors. Okay, can you see my screen?
I can see. Thank you.
It is over here, so I will be looking this way whilst I run through it. So an example of one of the common issues is payslips. So payslips not generating for an employee, and there can be multiple reasons for that to happen. So what I'll do first is load a pay run so I can show you in payroll, and then we'll go to the profile. So I'm going to load the pay run from overview, but if you're unfamiliar with Dayforce, you can also load pay runs within the pay run management tab itself. Okay, so as a starting point, if you do have employees that are not being paid, in the audit tab, there are a number of reports that are quite useful. And one of those is the active employees not paid report. So that can be used as a basis to do checks to see why particular employees not getting paid. If it's a smaller pay group, it'll be easier to recognize those employees. But if it's a large pay group, especially, having this will be useful just to work your way through and check off as you go through. So what I'll do is bring up an example of employee to show you what it looks like when there is no payslip being generated. This is what you usually see. So there's no payslip for select tab or no pay run selected entry. So this can pop up if there's, for whatever reason it is, it's not generating. So it can be that there's missing information in an employee's profile, which can be more common for new hires. It can also be time data, especially if they're hourly employees. So if we begin with the information that could be missing from an employee, you do have in the payroll this problems tab. So you can see a couple of examples in here of different warnings that pop up. A warning that may pop up is for things such as missing tax information or primary address. Those things will stop the pay from being calculated. So you can use that as a basis to go into the profile and just check those areas. But there's a few other things that may not be obvious. So it's just handy knowing what those items are. If we go into the employee's profile, I can show you those areas. So in employment and employment settings, what you have is the different policies for an employee. You have their pay class, so casual, pay type, casual, salaried, hourly, etc. You have where annual salary base rate. So for somebody who's casual or hourly, you have the base rate that allows you to enter in there, and it will automatically calculate the salary either on the hours that are there or the default hours in the system. And then on the other side, if you're unfamiliar with Dayforce, of course you have the salaried employees. You'd expect the salaried field to be you're able to populate, and then the base rate will calculate again based on the weekly hours. So the main one of the main areas that can stop the payslip from being calculated is a payroll policy. So and there can be a number of different reasons. It could be completely missing, or if you're a global company, it could just be the wrong country that's been selected there. So it's always worth checking. The payroll policy for the UK determines pension auto-enrolment, auto payment things such as salary, statutory parental pay, any occupational parental pay, earnings and deduction taxes. So essentially, if it's got the incorrect one in there or it's missing, Dayforce can't calculate the pay slip. So you need to make sure that is in there. If it isn't or it's wrong, then you can update it or add it in and then recalculate the pay slip and it should appear. But of course, there may be other reasons why that pay slip isn't calculating. So as I mentioned before, it's also the tax information which can cause the issue. So within payroll and tax definitions, so this more commonly seen for, as I said, for new starters, they may not have any tax information in there, in which case it needs to be added in, or for whatever reason it may have been accidentally removed, which is a lot less likely. There is a setting that can be enabled to default for new starters, their tax information in here, which can just prevent this issue from cropping up. If you don't have that enabled, then it's just a case of adding it in here. So P45 information or starter declaration for new hires. So add that in. Again, that you can calculate and check. There's one final area I'll show you in the profile that can cause that issue before I go back into payroll. So another warning can pop up is primary address. So if an employee's primary address is missing, then you can want to come in here and just check that. So you may come in here and see actually they do have an address. So there could be a couple of other things that are causing the issue. So you want to check that it does actually say primary address and it's not, or primary residence, and it's not a different type of address. And also just check the effective date. Just make sure that it's covering the whole pay period. Either of these can also cause the error, even if there is an address that is sat in here.
We do have a question from our audience, if you don't mind to read it for you. Are there any other errors or warnings that appear in payroll due to missing or inaccurate tax information?
Yes, there can be a few, but a lot of them less likely. One of the ones that you're likely to see in Dayforce at least once, definitely, is the missing starter declaration. So that is updated in the area, the tax definitions area, which I showed previously. So this happens often during the validation stage. So if Dayforce is expecting a starter declaration, particularly for a new hire, then it will crop up to say it needs it, so you can then put it in before commit. So it just prevents any errors before that FPS is submitted. It's also important to note that outside of your just normal new starters, when you're going through implementation, we do have an import called the tax information, which includes the tax codes, previous taxable pay, previous tax paid, etc. So there is a field on that import template for previously reported on FPS. So it's important that everybody who has been reported on there has that flag, and that will also stop the system trying to check again for that status declaration when actually they've already started previously.
Are there any common issues as well?
Common issues in terms of what?
In terms of it could be anything in terms, quite often I see loan deduction not appearing for an employee. So is that something that you encounter quite often as well?
Yes. So rather than it being an error that pops up, it's something you just need to be aware of. So as you said, loan deductions. One thing to check if you're adding a deduction for a loan, whether it's via quick entry or a payroll election, is to, if it's not actually calculating in the payslip, is to check whether it is a decline in balance or not. And I can show you quickly where you look for that in the setup itself. So within payroll setup, you have earnings and deductions. If we go to deductions and choose one as an example. So here we have a new start advanced recovery. You can see over this checkbox under options, decline in balance. So if you're trying to add a deduction, say for this one, and it doesn't have a balance, then it won't calculate for the employee, in which case what you need to do within the employee's profile under payroll and payroll elections is just make sure that this bottom section here, they have that balance assigned. As soon as you add that balance, then that deduction should calculate them.
Thank you. We do have a request from our audience. The request is if we can have a look at the pacing changes functionality that you've mentioned earlier, if that's okay with Lucy.
Yes, that's fine. I'll go back into payroll. One thing I'll say, if you're not familiar with Dayforce, is I like to use the menu, but you can use the search function to bring up modules instead because it can be quicker. Okay, so sync pay changes. If you come into payroll and go into the quick entry tab, what we have here is this sync pay changes button, which I mentioned previously. So if you click on that, you'll see a number of different options. So you have the payroll, non-auto-pay retro pay changes, auto-pay retro pay changes, elections, and UK specific is the new starts of prior periods. So I mentioned about salary changes and pulling those through. So salaries fall into auto pay. So you would select, sorry, I've got cough now. That auto payment would be for salary changes. So in that example that I mentioned, you would be clicking on this button, going into next, and then it's going to list all the employees in here that have had those retro salary changes. So you can select those individuals and pull them through. One thing I'd mention is to keep an eye on this last exit date that you've got here. If that date isn't the best option, then it can exclude employees. So sometimes the best thing you can do is to take that date out and apply it before you run this. So I mentioned there are other options within the sync pay changes. So you have non-auto pay. So for the non-auto pay to work in the particular earning that is time-based, you have to have it enabled to allow it to be used in sync pay changes. So this can actually be used for employees with an hourly rate. So quite often, if there's a rate change, people may think, oh, I'll go into the timesheets and just recalculate each period to get that difference pull through, when you can actually make use of this instead. And what it does is similar things, salaries, it pulls it all through as quick entries, and you can use that to pick up your retro hourly rate changes. So recalculate it for you rather than you going into particular time periods and using the recalculate timesheet option. Okay.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
I'll just quickly mention about the payroll election retro changes. This works in a similar way to the non-auto pay. Those elections do have to be enabled to allow retro adjustments for this to work. So if you do have any changes and it's not pulling through, then, or you're unable to make the retro change, then it's something to bear in mind to check the settings. And finally, the new starts of prior periods. So this one is useful if you do have anyone started in a prior period that didn't get paid in that period. You can use this and it's automatically going to pull through the missing pay and assign the correct check template as well for that.
Thank you so much. You've just made payroll look very easy.
It is, once you know.
Yeah, definitely. I find payroll to be very interesting, and when properly configured on Dayforce, it's always a pleasure to process payroll.
Yeah, I
And
think that's what I meant, is that payroll in Dayforce makes things easier. Payroll can sometimes not be easy.
Yeah, absolutely. Eve, thank you so much. We don't have any more questions from our audience. It was very useful, and also it gave us a lot of information about payroll, the different stages, testing. You've pretty much covered all aspects of payroll on today's session. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining today's webinar. I hope you found it very useful. Any last word for our audience, Eve?
I just thank everyone again for joining today. And if you did have any questions, anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to know, then please feel free to reach out to us. As well, if you do need any help with your Dayforce solution, or if you are looking for a new HRIS for your business, then you can reach us out to us on via LinkedIn. We also do have another upcoming Hello Help Desk session, which will be taking place early next year. So just stay connected to find out more about that one. And yeah, thank you again all.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Eve. Really appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Bente.
Bye.
Bye.